The theater was quiet in a way that felt soft, not empty. The lights were low and warm, like late afternoon sun slipping through curtains. People sat close together, yet each one seemed wrapped in their own small bubble of waiting. The stage stood still, wide and patient, as if it had learned how to breathe slowly. This was a place where dreams arrived carefully, step by step. On this night, the air felt heavier than usual, as though it knew something important was about to happen. Backstage, Marcelito Pomoy stood with his hands folded in front of him. He was young, but his posture carried years of listening and learning. He closed his eyes for a moment and breathed in, then out. The sounds around him were blurred, like waves far away. He thought of long roads, small rooms, and nights when music was the only light he had. He was not nervous in a sharp way. It was more like standing at the edge of deep water, calm but aware of its depth. Out in the audience, Simon Cowell leaned back in his chair. His face was familiar to millions, known for sharp words and quick judgments. Tonight, he looked tired but focused. He had heard many singers. Some were good, some were great, many tried too hard. He expected effort, but not surprise. His arms rested loosely, his eyes steady on the stage. He did not know why, but something about the silence before this performance held his attention longer than usual. When Marcelito walked onto the stage, his steps were quiet and careful. He wore simple clothes, nothing flashy, nothing loud. He smiled gently, the kind of smile that comes from gratitude rather than confidence. He stood still for a moment, letting the space settle around him. The lights brightened just enough to frame his face. The room felt like it leaned forward together, waiting for the first sound. The music began softly. It was slow, almost shy. Marcelito opened his mouth and sang. His voice was clear and steady, carrying a calm strength. It filled the theater without pushing. People listened without moving. The sound felt honest, like a story told at night when no one is rushing. Simon watched closely, his face unreadable, but his eyes had sharpened. This was not just another voice. It had weight, and it knew where it was going. As the song continued, something changed. Marcelito shifted his tone, gently, almost invisibly. The voice that followed was different, higher, softer, yet just as strong. It felt like another person had stepped into the room. A ripple moved through the audience. Some people leaned closer. Some covered their mouths. The sound carried emotion that seemed to rise from deep inside him, as if it had been waiting a long time to be heard. Marcelito's face remained calm, but inside him, memories moved quietly. He remembered singing alone, practicing when no one was listening. He remembered being told to stop, to be quiet, to choose a single way. He remembered nights when he wondered if his voice was too strange, too different. Standing on that stage now, he did not think of winning. He thought only of letting the sound be free, just this once. Simon's posture changed. He leaned forward without realizing it. His hand, often quick to press a buzzer, stayed still. The switch in voice was not a trick. It was smooth and natural, like watching the sky change color at dusk. Simon had built his career on knowing what worked. Yet here he was, unsure how to measure what he was hearing. It did not fit neatly into rules or categories. The song grew stronger, then softer again. Marcelito moved between voices with care, like walking across stones in a river. Each step was placed with respect. The audience stayed silent, afraid to break the moment. Some felt tears come without knowing why. The music did not shout. It asked to be felt. It carried loneliness, hope, and a quiet kind of courage that does not demand attention but earns it. For Marcelito, time seemed to slow. Each note felt long and full. He sensed the room listening, truly listening, and it gave him strength. He no longer saw faces. He felt warmth, like being held up by many hands. The fear he had carried for years began to loosen. In its place was a gentle trust, not in the judges but in the sound itself. Simon's mind drifted, just for a moment, to his own early days. He remembered uncertainty, the long climb, the need to be heard. He had built walls of criticism over time, partly to protect himself, partly to protect the show. But now those walls felt thin. The performance was not asking for approval. It was simply offering truth. Simon felt something rare for him on that stage. He felt quiet. When the final note faded, it did not disappear at once. It hung in the air, soft and trembling. Marcelito stood still, his hands at his sides. He did not bow right away. He let the silence finish the song. The audience held its breath, then slowly, as if waking from a shared dream, applause began. It grew, steady and strong, but never harsh. It sounded like rain. Simon did not clap at first. He remained still, his eyes fixed on Marcelito. Words came to him, then slipped away. He had made a career of speaking, of judging, of shaping moments with sharp sentences. But now, none of that felt right. He opened his mouth, then closed it. For the first time in a long while, silence felt like the most honest response. Marcelito looked toward the judges, unsure what to expect. He saw Simon sitting quietly, not smiling, not frowning. Just present. That look meant more than praise. It meant he had been heard fully. The applause continued, wrapping around him like a blanket. He bowed gently, his head lowered in thanks, not just to the crowd, but to the journey that had brought him here. When Simon finally spoke, his voice was slower than usual. He chose his words with care. He did not talk about technique or market value. He spoke about feeling. He admitted, simply, that he had not expected to be moved this way. The room listened again, this time to him. His honesty surprised even himself. The power of the moment had softened him, just enough. The rest of the night passed in a blur for Marcelito. People smiled at him. Hands reached out. Voices praised. Yet inside, he felt calm. The biggest change had already happened. He had stood in his truth and been accepted, not because he fit in, but because he did not. That realization settled deep, like a stone finding its place at the bottom of a river. Later, when the lights dimmed and the theater emptied, Marcelito sat alone for a moment. The stage was quiet again. He touched the floor lightly with his hand, grounding himself. He thought of younger versions of himself, singing without certainty. He wished he could tell them to keep going, to trust the sound inside. Maybe this moment would reach them somehow. Simon left the theater with a thoughtful expression. The noise of the city returned, loud and fast. Yet inside him, something had slowed. The performance stayed with him, not as a show moment, but as a reminder. Even after all these years, there were still voices that could surprise him. Still stories that could break through routine and touch something real. In the days that followed, people would talk about that night. They would share clips and reactions. They would use big words and bright titles. But beneath all of that was a simple truth. A young man had stood on a stage and shared his voice honestly. A judge had listened without armor. For a few minutes, the world had moved at a gentler pace. And for Marcelito Pomoy, that was enough. He carried that feeling forward, not as a trophy, but as a quiet strength. Wherever he would sing next, he knew this. His voice did not need permission. It only needed space. And sometimes, when space is given, even the most experienced ears can be left speechless.